So welcome to my very first live question and answer. I will be talking today about intuitive practice, intuitive training, intuitive development, intuition, my experiences with intuition, and just answering questions that anyone might have. So I want to get started today with a quick meditation. I'm doing this on YouTube and Instagram, so I'll accept questions from either place. Just if you want to join me in a quick meditation just to ground into the moment, that would be lovely. So let's just start by taking a deep breath in and out, and in and out. And one more time, in and out. Now bring your attention to your breath in your abdomen, just following your breath. Taking a few deep breaths like that. And then starting to imagine as you breathe in that you are drawing grounding energy up from the earth. And as you breathe out, that you are bringing energy down from the top of your head down into the earth, creating a circuit with the earth. So in, drawing energy in, letting it flow through you, and out on the out breath. And taking one more deep breath like that, drawing in as much as you possibly can, and then releasing it out. Thank you. So just to introduce myself, my name is Gada Jane. I'm a psychic intuitive, and I do readings, and I also offer training in intuition, in developing your intuition, and in learning intuitive practice. And I have a few questions that have been left in my Instagram stories that I'll answer, and I'll answer any questions that come up as we go along. So first of all, let me explain a little bit about what I mean by intuition, because I have a little bit of a funny way of thinking about what intuition is and what I mean when I say intuition, and then I'll get into questions. So when I talk about intuition, I'm really using a kind of like broad category dictionary definition of intuition, which is, I'm using a subcategory of that category, but I think that we almost use intuition in different ways at different times. Hi. So we use intuition to mean sometimes broadly any kind of thinking that happens quickly and we don't see the process. And I think that's a very good definition of intuition because it encapsulates any of the ways you might want to use intuition. And those include very secular definitions, intuition that is about understanding things about yourself, but it also includes intuitive things that we don't necessarily directly call intuition, like psychic abilities, mediumship. And the reason that I call those intuition, I include them under the broad category of intuition, is that they have that similar process of being very connected to your internal process. They are not necessarily they're not the same as, say, a quick pattern thinking process that might be that might show up in, say, a Myers-Briggs model, but they are they do have that same quality of just appearing. So when you think about intuition, you have this sense of it, anything that just appears, but then sometimes intuition is something we talk about as that sort of deep knowing. I was speaking to somebody earlier this week, and she was talking about intuition being the kind of knowing that is related to truth, like that sense of truth about yourself, about the world, about your purpose, sort of truth with a capital T, you might say. And so that's kind of I think that's the other place where we use the word intuition as a very, as a standalone word. So I think there are two places where we use the word intuition just flat and we mean completely different things. One is this broad category that just describes how the information comes. And the other one is this concept of true knowing that just arises. And I use the term in both ways at different times. But a lot of the time I'm really talking about, when I'm talking about training intuition, I'm talking about that second form, which is the true knowing, the knowing about yourself, the getting insight. And I'm also talking about these other things that we wouldn't necessarily call intuition in a straightforward way, like psychic phenomena. I'm talking about, because I think that the processes of how you communicate with yourself are very similar, whether you're tapping into another person's energy or you're trying to understand something about your purpose. So I'm talking about training that kind of ability to communicate with yourself through your own internal language. So I'm going to start answering questions now. And if you have questions, I'm happy to take them. And I have a couple from I just have to pull them up from the story that I wrote. Hi, Maya. Just have to find where I put this. Okay, so the first question that I was asked was, talk about your story. This is from the Walking Portal on Instagram. Talk about your story, why you're an advocate for intuition, and why you started your page. So my story, I guess, started really in a clear way about 5 years ago. I was a skeptic until then. I had not really given that much thought to the possibility that psychic phenomena was a real thing. And I was essentially trying to understand what I wanted and what would make me happy. I was living a life that was very much structured by what I thought I should be doing. It was like I had a very kind of angry, narrow-minded voice in my head that was always giving me instructions. And I went to Europe and I started essentially trying to learn how to relax and how to, I wouldn't have phrased it this way, but how to follow my intuition. So I would started to do things like just trying to understand what I felt inside and trying to tune into the sensations that I would have that could maybe give me information about what would make me happy. And it was a very sort of haphazard process. And I would just sort of feel things. And what I discovered very quickly is that I would have these experiences that felt incredibly synchronous every time I would do this. So pretty much every time I would do this, I would end up, maybe finding a book by energy sensing. I didn't even know what energy sensing was at the time. I would just sort of walk, be guided by my sensations, end up by a bookstore, hold my hand over this box of bargain books and end up with a book that was about finding your spiritual path by walking. And every time I would be kind of like, I don't know how that happened. I don't know how, so I would just keep exploring. I would be kind of like, that was exactly so precise. So I would just keep exploring and doing more of these things. And eventually I, through this process, ended up at in the office of a psychic in Vancouver. And I walked in and he just knew all of these things that had happened, that were going on in my head that I hadn't really spoken about. And it was, again, so precise, it was hard to dismiss, which I was at this time very much trying to do. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to sort of be able to say, my brain was saying, okay, well, if I can just figure out why this is wrong, I can put it away and go back to living normally. But that wasn't working. So I ended up in this psychic's office and he was saying all these very precise things and I was just fascinated again. So I was flying out of Vancouver on the Monday and I booked another reading with him on the Monday morning. I show up and he looks at me and he sort of said, well, I just did a reading for you. Why are you here? And I said, I don't know. I just, oh, hi, I'm doing well. How are you? Getting messages on Instagram. So I was just, I'm just answering my story of becoming an intuitive and becoming an advocate. So I had basically, the psychic sort of looked at me. He said, well, I don't know why you're here. I gave a reading. And I said, I didn't know why I was here. And he looked at me again and he said, I think you could do this. And he spent the hour that I had booked teaching me how to hold my hand over a picture and read pictures. And he was saying that it was very accurate. He was saying that I had an ability to do this. And at the time, I didn't necessarily take that seriously, because I was always looking for a reason to disbelieve it. So I went home, tried this with a friend. I just kind of held my hand over his picture, called up his energy body, saw that he had a red point that meant pain over his hip. And then I ended up asking him about it, and he actually said no, but months later came back and said, actually, that is true. I do have pain in my hip. So I started doing it, and I found that every time I would do a reading, at the time I was just getting images, and the images didn't seem to, didn't mean anything to me, but when I would show them to the person I was reading for, they would say, oh yes, this is tangibly something literal in my life. And so it was something that I just couldn't ignore. And as I continued to do this over and over again, I continued to have these experiences that were things that I just, so precise, so accurate. And over time, I was able to fill out more and more information. And I think the reason, so that's how I got into doing my own intuitive work. And the second part of this question is, why are you an advocate for intuition? And why did I start my page? So the reason that I have become an advocate for intuition is partly because it's had such an effect on my life, and because I felt like it was something that I didn't understand the value of and had resisted, because I'd been given a story that your inner experience is useless and meaningless, and the way to get to truth is to sort of set aside your inner experience and test scientifically or try to understand. And because I'd been given that story, I had not used or not had access to an ability that I had for most of my life. And once I started to work with it, it came very easily and very quickly. It was actually much harder emotionally for me to accept it, and for me to start working with it, and for me to tell other people about it and talk about it, than it was ever to do the work itself. The work itself has come very, very easily. It just grows naturally. It's something that I feel excited to do and I love doing. So, but I've always had this sort of like kind of post-rationalist upbringing, stress about doing it as well. And so the second part of the question of why I'm an advocate for intuition, a big part of that is that I think it's valuable, and that I want to talk to people who maybe don't have access to this, who don't understand how it might be useful for them, and give them a language and like a sort of an access road into working with something that may well be transformative and useful for them. And there's a second piece of that, which is what for a long time always came naturally for me, was seeing what's going on inside of people. So even before I started really developing and understanding my psychic and intuitive abilities, I really, when I would meet a person, I was very aware just naturally that they had what they deeply wanted, you might say. I was very kind of hypersensitive to people's purposes, which is something actually that I've been thinking about. Maybe I should do purpose readings, because what I feel like I naturally care about and read is this sense of, it's almost like an energy field that sort of drives the person. And I'm hypersensitive to the ways people suppress it and the ways people, like, it can become like this sort of channel that is clear through you, that gets expressed, or this sort of thing that never goes away that you sort of keep in your abdomen and think is a fake thing. Or maybe you try to express it, but it gets convoluted on the way out. And it's almost like the things that really are meaningful and make people's lives feel purposeful are visible to me. And thank you, Maria. So it's almost like these things are visible and I can sense them and feel them. And I used to explore this through my work with artists. And I think that it's that sort of sensitivity and that sense that I can see. What I have is this sort of strange ability to see almost inside a person and describe what it feels like to be them in ways that are like how you process emotions, what you're sensitive to, what you feel like, how you think, what processes. It's almost like I think about mental processes, emotional processes, and intuitive processes, and I can describe almost like this sort of network of a person. I have a comment that I look Scandinavian. Well, my grandmother was actually Norwegian, so I am partly Scandinavian, but then I have a lot of UK as well. So because of that, what I was talking about, this ability to see inside people, it's like I'm an advocate for intuition because I want people to tune into themselves and understand that the inner world is this actual real space, the inner world that like, if you think about yourself as having this kind of plane of consciousness, and everything, including what you see, including what you sense, the outside world is sort of filtered and understood through this plane of consciousness. You are, you're actually, your inner world is a space that you can explore. And so often it's like we just ignore that. So what I want is for people to discover what's there inside them. And I think that can help them find meaningful experiences. But in a selfish way also, I just get stressed when people are blocking their purpose, or when I meet people and I feel what I would call that open channel from purpose to expression. That's very exciting for me. And I feel like we live in a world where that's very rare and nobody talks about that. And yet that's primarily what I see. So it's like somebody kind of walking around constantly distressed. I'm somebody walking around constantly distressed by the way people sort of hold themselves back, because I can see that. I can see, oh, you'd really like to be creating this kind of art, but you think you should be a practical person doing this, but you don't understand that the way you see the world is actually uniquely specifically capable to express this to the world. And that's really something that motivates me in a personal way, almost to make more people that feel that great joy of the open channel from purpose to expression. And I guess that's not really a selfish thing, but just because it's so viscerally unpleasant for me when people around me are blocking what they care about, it feels like a selfish purpose. And why did I start my page? Initially, just because it's called Deepen the Mystery. And initially, it was just a place to explore meaningful experiences. And then it evolved into talking more and more about sharing the intuitive practice, because I feel like there's something very specifically about the inner language and the way that people inner world are constructed and sort of work almost as a symphony of different processes that is very linked to spiritual practices. It's linked to more standard intuitive practices, more common ones at least, but it's not something that I've heard people talk about. And that's a place where I think I can kind of add something to the conversation. And that's specifically what I want to add. It's about intuition as a process, and it's about approaching intuition through your own internal languages and abilities, and really understanding yourself in order to unlock your own intuitive abilities. And intuitive abilities really are very different person to person in a really specific ways. I was speaking to somebody earlier this week, and she'd been told that she was wrong for the way she was channeling intuitive information, because she was drawing it up from her abdomen instead of channeling from above. So she was told this was not an appropriate way of channeling intuitive information. And it was, the reason this came up is because I was very struck by how she takes in information. So one of the things I can perceive when I do a reading is often, how do they absorb information and how do they process it? So when what I had started to say is that it almost needs to come, her intuition needs to come out from this sort of channel outwards. But the way she takes in information is almost imprinting all at once. It's very quick, imprint all at once, and then she can draw it out and she processes it inside. So it's not that the information is all coming from her when she reads it. It's actually something she draws in, stores there, and then it comes out. Now, I don't know exactly why it works like this for different people, but what I do know is that I can almost see the energy forms of these, like the relationship between how things enter and how you process inside. And when I described this, she found this accurate to her. And I think that, and the reason that I bring it up is that I think it's very important to understand how we process, as opposed to mimic the ways that other people tell us how to process intuitive information. So we have these ideas of channeling, or we have these ideas of connecting to spirit, and maybe an image of what that looks like an open channel from your crown chakra, which it can look like that. And certainly, even if that's not your natural process, you can practice with those methods. But it's also useful to understand how you how you actually, like, if you see something, what does it feel like? How does it come in? I maybe draw in through almost my whole body, but somebody else might draw specifically through through their crown chakra. And if you feel those patterns and you understand them, you can use your natural abilities as this basis for your intuitive abilities, but then you can expand outwards and learn other techniques. But it's harder to expand if you don't use your strengths as sort of the basis or the beginning place. So that's why I started wanting to actually share what I was doing and how I think about it. I want to share something that I think is kind of a specific way of thinking of intuitive abilities that's very based on personal processes and practices. So I think I have time to do one more question. Oh, Yasmin says, yeah, that makes so much sense. Thank you. Have you done any intuitive practices yourself? And the next question I have is, do you use cards in your readings? Which is an easy one, much shorter question. I do not use cards in my readings. I have had cards. I have maybe one deck of cards, but I don't use them in my readings because for me, first of all, I learned to read by holding my hand over a picture. So I was always reading just in my energy field. And then I've grown into sort of using visuals and very, very much almost like mapping the person to my energy body. And that just comes much more naturally to me. And I never really fully learned to use cards. I find them interesting. I use them maybe occasionally for myself, just as a way of kind of playing with them or trying to learn them. I'm very interested in systems, but I'm much more what I would call a pure intuitive, not in like other things are impure. It's just I think I make a distinction between intuition and systematized versions of this insight, giving insight in this way. And so I think of intuition as being the intuitive process, and most people who are using card readings are actually using both a system and intuitive. So I consider that sort of a hybrid. So when I say pure intuitive, I just mean literally, I don't use much of a system. I'm just reading my intuitive sensations and feelings. So no, I don't use cards. So Yasmin says, my intuition comes through my abdomen too, and it's like very quick flashes. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, the abdomen is a really interesting place. One of the things that I discovered when I started sort of highly testing, I was still in this process of trying to dismiss intuitive processes and test everything and see what I could figure out intuitively and what I couldn't, is I would test I would try to see whether I could predict certain things, like what color a stop sign was going to be or what I was going to see when I walked around the corner. And one of the things that I discovered is that I could, if I had a feeling, it was hard to call these sometimes, but if I had a feeling in my abdomen, it was usually very accurate. I could actually watch it and feel where it was. But sometimes it was like I felt I was having this feeling, like I felt like, oh, that's the feeling of the light going to be red or something. But I would have that feeling in my chest, but it was like a mimicking of the abdomen feeling. And if it was in the wrong place in my body, it was always fake. So noticing where things happen and which things seem to be true intuitions and where they're located in your body was a really interesting thing to try to like work with your own intuition. And does anybody have any more questions? Anybody watching? See if I have another in here. I think that's been half an hour. Oh, hello, Carolyn. I'm just finishing up here. So that's basically an answer to a few questions, and I think this is a long enough time to be talking. This is my first Q&A, so I'm kind of getting used to this. If you have any other questions, please feel free to send them to me on Instagram or write a comment below this video on YouTube. I'm going to post this on both platforms. So I hope you will look at more of my videos about intuition. I'm trying to share more about how I think about it and what's sort of different and specific, what I think I can offer. I think what I offer in the way I think about it is a very specific sort of way of going deep inside your internal world and building outwards from there. So I look forward to hearing thoughts, feedback, questions, anything that I could clarify, anything you'd like me to make a video about, let me know. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.